The battle above the Arcadia Rim was over before the human fleet had a chance to organize. What had started as a peaceful convoy of trade ships, bound for a quiet outpost in the far reaches of human space, became a massacre in the blink of an eye. Hundreds of civilians, men, women, children, were torn apart by an alien species whose mere existence was enough to send shockwaves through the galaxy. The Uivarn. It wasn't just their ferocity that made them feared across the galaxy. It was their minds. The Uivarn were psychic predators, their thoughts capable of bending reality to their will. Even the most sophisticated human warships, equipped with the latest anti-psionic technology, were no match for the raw power of their alien minds. The Uivarn's mental reach overwhelmed their defenses, turning crew members against each other, triggering hallucinations, and scrambling the enemy's strategic systems. In a matter of hours, a once proud fleet of Terran warships was reduced to floating wreckage. At the heart of the carnage, Captain Jake Alvarez stood at the command deck of the U.S. Vanguard, staring into the void. The sensors were awash of static, and the tactical screen flickered with dead contacts. His crew, normally battle-hardened, was disoriented, their minds fraying under the psychic pressure. He could feel it, too, a constant hum at the edge of his consciousness, tugging at his thoughts, threatening to unravel his mind. "Captain, we need to pull back," Lieutenant Sarah Fields called out, her voice tight with strain. "We're outclassed here. The Uivarn, they're not even trying to fight fair. They're toying with us." Alvarez's jaw clenched. It was true. The Uivarn were a force unlike any humanity had encountered. Their ships were built for war, but their true weapon was their ability to warp the thoughts of their enemies. It was how they had brought entire fleets to their knees, how they had crushed civilizations without firing a single shot. And now, they were turning that power on humanity. "We don't have the luxury of retreat," Alvarez said, voice low, but filled with steel. "Not yet. We make one last stand, and we fight for every damned ship, every soul on board. We owe it to the people on those transports." He could hear the rumble of approval among the crew. It wasn't much, just the murmurs of a handful of soldiers who had been trained to fight, who believed that surrender was a failure that should never be entertained. But it was something, and in a galaxy filled with uncertainty, it was enough to keep them from breaking. "Set all weapons to maximum power," Alvarez ordered, his eyes hardening. "We're going to make them regret underestimating humanity." As the crew scrambled to execute the orders, Alvarez felt something shift within him. There was no guarantee they would survive this. The odds were impossibly stacked against them. But this was humanity's first real test against the Uivarn, and they would make it count. The Uivarn had come to claim their piece of the galaxy, but they hadn't counted on one thing. Humanity was not so easily crushed. The Vanguard powered up, and with it, a glimmer of defiance flared into existence. The first spark of what would become a wildfire across the stars. The aftermath of the attack was a bloodied mess. The Vanguard limped into orbit above Eden Prime, its hull pockmarked with battle scars. The convoy ships had been reduced to twisted wreckage, their cargo, families, settlers, and traders, lost to the Uivarn's brutal assault. Captain Alvarez stood on the bridge, his eyes hollow, looking out over the wreckage that had once been the heart of a peaceful mission. The victory, if you could call it that, had come at a steep cost. "We've lost nearly a third of our fleet, sir," Lieutenant Fields reported quietly, her voice strained. The tactical displays on the bridge showed the remaining assets, a handful of battered warships, their crews shaken but alive. "The rest are either damaged or scattered. The Uivarn didn't just attack. They broke us." Alvarez nodded grimly. "But we're still here." "For now," Fields muttered, but it wasn't just the tactical situation she was worried about. It was the unrest that was beginning to spread throughout the Terran Alliance itself. News of the massacre had filtered through the colonies and government channels, stoking the flames of debate. The Uivarn had done what they always did, shattered morale, and made it clear that no human was safe. But it wasn't just the external threat that was tearing the alliance apart. There were cracks within. "Captain, you're being called to the council," Field said, glancing at her console. "Senator Claire Winston is pushing for a vote to recall our forces. She's demanding we stop expanding, close our borders, and seek peace with the Uivarn." Winston's voice had already become a rallying cry for the pacifists who believed humanity's expansion had gone too far. She wasn't the only one. The Horizon Coalition, a growing faction of colonists and fringe military groups, had gained traction, arguing that humanity's desire to conquer space had sparked a war they were ill-equipped to win. They'd wanted to pull back, end the colonial push, and negotiate with the Uivarn. Some even suggested surrender might be the only way forward. Alvarez felt the anger stir within him. They had just fought a battle, and now they were supposed to fold. "I'll be there," he said curtly, turning on his heel. He couldn't ignore the voices calling for peace. Some of them were legitimate, born from fear and weariness. But the thought of backing down after the Vanguard had fought tooth and nail against the Uivarn felt like a betrayal. The meeting was already in progress when Alvarez entered the chamber. The holographic display above the table showed the faces of key officials from the core colonies, their expressions grim and cautious. "Captain Alvarez," Senator Winston said, her voice tight with tension. "You've seen what they're capable of. We cannot keep throwing our people into the meat grinder. We need diplomacy, not more bloodshed." General Mark Hudson, seated across from her, was having none of it. "And what, you think the Uivarn are just going to walk away because we beg them to? If we do nothing, we're inviting extinction." Alvarez remained silent, his gaze flicking from one leader to the next. The council was divided, but in his gut, he knew which path they were heading toward. Either they would strike back with everything they had, or they would crumble. "We will fight," Alvarez said, his voice steady but cold. "We will make them regret attacking us, and we will make them pay for every life they've taken." The room fell silent at his declaration, and for the first time in weeks, Alvarez felt a fire stir within him. The debate over peace or war wasn't just political anymore. It was personal. As the session continued, Alvarez stepped out of the chamber, his mind already racing. The battle had only just begun, and the decision humanity made now would echo for generations. The alliance was fractured, and the path forward was uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity had reached a breaking point, and it was about to push back with everything it had. The Uivarn didn't believe in mercy. Captain Alvarez learned the truth the hard way as the remnants of the Terran fleet regrouped in the shadow of Eden Prime. The attacks had only intensified after the council debate, with the Uivarn sensing the growing disarray within the human leadership. Their next strike, it seemed, was inevitable. The intelligence reports were grim. Uivarn warships, vast and deadly, were already advancing on human territories in the Zeta system, a strategic choke point in the outer colonies. If they could break through, the Uivarn would have open access to humanity's core systems, and that meant utter defeat. There was no room for negotiation now, only survival. "You've got one shot at this, Captain," General Hudson said, his grizzled face set with determination as they stood on the bridge of the Vanguard. "We're hitting them hard. No retreat, no quarter." Alvarez had no illusions about the odds. Their fleet was a fraction of the size it had once been, and their ships were battered from the previous encounter. Still, it was the only chance they had. If they couldn't push the Uivarn back now, the rest of the colonies would fall like dominoes. "Set course for the Zeta system," Alvarez ordered, his voice steely. "Prepare for maximum engagement." They moved swiftly, setting their course toward the heart of the enemy's advance. The crew of the Vanguard was a mix of veterans and raw recruits, many of whom had never seen real battle before the Uivarn arrived. But in the dark recesses of the galaxy, where the stars seemed distant and cold, a new sense of unity was forming among them, a collective will to fight and survive. As they approached the enemy's position, the bridge fell silent. Every officer was focused, every soldier braced for the inevitable. Then the alert rang through the ship. Incoming Nivarn ships, dozens of them, emerging from the darkness like shadows given form. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons powered and ready. "We're outnumbered 3-1, Lieutenant Fields reported, voice tight. "And they're already using their psychic projections." Alvarez gripped the command chair, feeling the familiar pressure of a battle he knew they couldn't afford to lose. He had no intention of going down quietly. "Divert all power to the shields. Prepare to engage on my mark." The Yuivarn weren't just attacking. They were manipulating. A wave of psychic energy swept across the Terran fleet, distorting the minds of every officer on the bridge. The ship's tactical display flickered and warped, showing false targets, twisting the battlefield into a nightmare of shifting shadows and disembodied voices. Alvarez fought to keep his focus as the mental onslaught tried to tear at his mind. "They're using their telepathy to disrupt our systems," Lieutenant Fields shouted. "We need to break through, or we'll be sitting ducks." "Hold the line," Alvarez roared, his voice cutting through the confusion. "We're not letting them take this system. We fight now." Alvarez didn't wait for an order. He tapped into the last reserve power the Vanguard had, pushing the ship beyond its normal capabilities. The engines screamed as they surged forward, closing the gap between the human fleet and the enemy. The first wave of Yvarn ships fired, their weapons glowing with a fierce green light, slashing through the void. "Return fire," Alvarez shouted. The Vanguard's guns erupted, the energy blasts lighting up the darkness as they streaked toward the enemy. The human ships fired in unison, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hope. They were holding their ground. But the Yuivarn were relentless. A psychic scream echoed through the fleet, breaking the fragile grip the humans had on their control systems. Crew members doubled over in agony, blood running from their noses and ears. The air in the command center felt thick with pressure, as though the very weight of the universe was pushing down on them. Through the chaos, Captain Alvarez's thoughts remained clear, his focus unwavering. The Yuivarn were powerful, but humanity had something they didn't understand. A refusal to bend, to break, to submit. "Push forward. We have to make them bleed," Alvarez shouted, his voice cracking with fierce resolve. The battle was on. And this time, humanity wasn't running. The battle for Zeta Tau was a bloodbath. The human fleet fought tooth and nail, holding their ground against the Yuivarn with every shred of strength they could muster. But despite their valiant effort, the tide was not turning in their favor. By the time the remaining Yuivarn ships retreated into the darkness, the human fleet had been decimated. Of the 30 warships that had engaged, only 6 remained, and none were in fighting condition. Captain Alvarez stood at the center of the war room on Eden Prime, his hands clenched into fists as he surveyed the aftermath. The images on the holoscreen showed their shattered fleet, and the crew's exhaustion and fear were palpable. The debate had been building for weeks, but now it was impossible to ignore. Inside the command center, General Hudson stood with his arms crossed, his expression hard as stone. He was a veteran of countless battles, and despite the losses, his voice rang with iron resolve. "We fight. We don't back down. Not now. We push deeper into Yvarn space, hit them where it hurts. We finish this, or we die trying," Hudson said, his tone commanding. Senator Claire Winston, standing opposite him, exhaled sharply. Her face was pale, her eyes tired from the constant weight of leadership, but her determination was just as fierce. "We are not going to war to the point of extinction, General," she snapped. "We've lost too much already. How many more lives do you want to throw into the fire? Our colonies are in chaos. People are afraid. And they're angry. If we don't seek a diplomatic solution now, we risk losing everything we fought for. You're gambling with the future of humanity." Her words were met with a chorus of murmurs from the council members, most of whom were from the core worlds. They had been pushing for a ceasefire from the beginning. And now, After witnessing the horrors of battle firsthand, their calls for peace had only grown louder. But every time the subject of surrender came up, Alvarez could feel a deep, searing anger building in his chest. "Enough," Alvarez interrupted, his voice low but cutting through the tension. The room quieted, and all eyes turned to him. "We can't afford to debate peace right now. Look around. Our fleet's crippled, but we're still here. The Uivarn want us broken, but they don't understand one thing. Humanity doesn't bow easily. They think they can win by shattering our resolve, but they don't know what they're dealing with." Alvarez's words hung in the air like a challenge. Despite the brutal losses, despite the overwhelming odds, the fire inside him refused to die. They had to keep fighting, not for victory, but for survival. If they didn't stand, then humanity would be nothing more than a footnote in the galaxy's history. Senator Winston's face softened, but she didn't back down. "And what happens when there's nothing left to fight for? Jake, how many more will we lose before we finally face the reality of our position?" "I'll tell you what happens," Alvarez shot back, his voice resolute. "We make them face the consequences of their actions. We'll rebuild our fleet, we'll make allies where we can, and we'll hit them where it hurts. This fight isn't over." A long silence stretched between them before General Hudson spoke up, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "We need to know where the next blow is coming from. If we're to keep this up, we need intelligence, real intelligence." He glanced at the holographic map, his mind already calculating their next move. "We need to know where the Uivarn are retreating to, and what they're planning." Alvarez nodded. "Get me a team ready for a deep strike. It's time we take the fight directly to them." With that, the meeting ended. The decision had been made. Humanity would fight on, whether the rest of the galaxy liked it or not. But as Alvarez left the war room, the weight of what they were about to embark on felt heavier than ever. There was no turning back now. And as the days stretched ahead, the true cost of their resolve was yet to be seen. The mission was set. Captain Alvarez had made it clear that the next step was to take the fight directly to the Uivarn stronghold. After their brutal ambush at Zeta, the Terran fleet was now little more than a shadow of its former self, with only a handful of ships left capable of combat. But the Uivarn were retreating, and that, Alvarez realized, was both a sign of their vulnerability and their fear. On Eden Prime, the High Command had begun to prepare for a bold move, a deep strike against the heart of Uivarn space. The goal wasn't just to push them back, it was to cripple their command structure, to send a message that humanity would never fold, never submit. But there were risks. The Uivarn's psychic powers were vast, and their ability to disrupt human minds had already proven to be devastating. And now, the intel coming in from various sources indicated that the Uivarn were in the process of consolidating their power, readying something even more dangerous than the psychic warfare they had already unleashed. "There's no time to waste," Alvarez muttered to himself as he paced in the operations center, scanning through the intelligence reports. "Every moment we delay, they're getting stronger. We need to hit them fast and hard, before they regroup." The target, Verus, a forgotten world deep within Uivarn-controlled space, rumored to house a key strategic facility, the Mind Stone. This ancient artifact, according to a decrypted Uivarn transmission, was the source of their unparalleled psychic power. If the Terrans could destroy it, they would cripple the Uivarn's ability to wage war effectively. "Captain, we've got a problem," Lieutenant Fields reported from the communications station, her voice edged with concern. "We've been tracking Uivarn communications, and it's not just the Mind Stone we're up against. According to our sources, they've begun to deploy something new, an entire fleet of war-formed soldiers. These aren't just regular troops. They're genetically engineered, designed specifically to counteract human forces. If we go in without proper preparation, we could walk straight into a slaughter." Alvarez's gaze sharpened. "War-formed soldiers? How are we supposed to fight against that?" "That's why we need an infiltration team. Dr. Laura Jenkins, the lead scientist on the mission, chimed in from the far side of the room. Her usual calm demeanor had a sharp edge today. We have a theory. If we can disable the psychic amplification systems that the Uivarn use, we might be able to neutralize their war forms. But we'll need to get close. Very close. That means a small strike team, covered, with minimal support. If they detect us before we reach the Mind Stone, it's over. Alvarez nodded slowly. The plan was risky, extremely risky, but it was their only option. I'll handpick the team. We'll infiltrate, disable their defenses, and destroy the Mind Stone. Then we pull out or die trying. As the team assembled, Alvarez felt the weight of the decision press down on him. There were no guarantees. The Uivarn were unlike anything humanity had faced before, and he knew that every member of this mission might not come back. But he had no choice. If humanity was to survive, this was their last chance. The ship Vanguard would be their transport, a shadow among shadows, slipping through the depths of enemy space. As the crew geared up for the mission, Alvarez gathered his officers, locking eyes with each of them. "This is it," he said, his voice steady, though inside, he could feel a sense of finality. "If we don't succeed, humanity won't just lose this war. We'll be wiped from history. But if we do succeed, we turn the tide." The crew nodded in grim silence, their resolve hardening. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future. And as the ship hurtled toward the heart of enemy space, one thing became certain. The galaxy was about to feel the full fury of humanity's breaking point. The cold void of space stretched infinitely before them as the Vanguard and its crew prepared for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever undertaken. They had slipped past Uivarn detection systems, entering deep into enemy-controlled territory, with little more than stealth and audacity on their side. The plan was simple, at least in theory. Infiltrate Verus, locate the Mind Stone, and destroy it. But the simplicity of the objective was overshadowed by the complexity of the risks. Captain Alvarez stood in the command center, hands folded behind his back, staring at the slowly revolving holographic map of the system. Verus was a barren world, a place long abandoned by most intelligent species except the Uivarn. Intelligence reports had indicated it was a high-security site, a place where the enemy's most dangerous assets were stored. As the mission progressed, the hours dragged on in oppressive silence. Every system on the ship had been muted to reduce their electromagnetic signature. The crew worked at a whisper, knowing that one wrong move could spell their doom. The stakes were clear. If they were detected, the Vanguard would be utterly outmatched, surrounded by an overwhelming fleet of Uivarn warships, and humanity's last hope would be extinguished. Lieutenant Fields approached Alvarez, her expression tense. "Captain, we're entering the Verus system now. All stealth systems are operational, but the detection nets around the planet are formidable. We've got one chance at this." Alvarez nodded, his jaw set. "We'll make it count. Once we're on the ground, there's no turning back. Get the team ready." Below the surface of Verus, deep in the planet's cavernous network of ruins, the small infiltration team was preparing for its descent. The team had been carefully selected, each member a veteran of the worst humanity's wars had to offer, trained not just to fight, but to survive. The team was led by Commander Rachel Steele, a specialist in covert operations, and included Dr. Laura Jenkins, who was the only one aboard who understood the Mind Stone's theoretical workings. "We're on our way," Steele reported via comms. "Everyone, double-check your gear and stay sharp. No heroics, no mistakes." The drop pod carrying Steele and her team detached from the Vanguard, plummeting toward the surface of Verus. It was a turbulent descent. The air was thick with static from the enemy's psychic interference, and the Uivarn's presence felt oppressive, even from miles above the surface. But the team's training had prepared them for this. Steele's mind was clear, despite the growing pressure in the atmosphere. As the pod hit the surface with a bone-rattling jolt, the team scrambled to deploy. The cavernous ruins stretched out before them, remnants of a forgotten civilization, now just a backdrop for the Yvarn's twisted experiments. The team's primary objective was simple: find the Mind Stone. But Steele knew that the real objective was much darker. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to break the Yvarn's hold on the galaxy, to ensure that humanity's spark couldn't be extinguished. "Stay low, move fast," Steele whispered into her comms, the only sound that of boots crunching on the cracked stone beneath them. "We've got to make it to the heart of the facility. Let's go." As they moved deeper into the ruins, every footstep was met with the feeling of being watched. The psychic pressure from the Yvarn grew stronger, and every now and then, Steele could feel the faintest tug at her mind, as if something, or someone, was trying to reach into her thoughts. But she pushed it aside. They had no time for weakness. The ruins loomed like the hollow carcass of an ancient beast, and in the distance, the team could see the glow of something far more unnatural. The Mind Stone, a pulsating sphere of energy, shimmering with an otherworldly light that seemed to warp the air around it. It was beautiful. It was deadly. And it was humanity's last hope. As they approached the Mind Stone, the ground trembled, and the silence was broken by the shrill screech of alien warform soldiers emerging from the shadows. The hunt had begun. The moment the warform soldiers emerged from the shadows, Steele's blood ran cold. These weren't the typical Yvarn troops they'd encountered before. No, these soldiers were something far worse. Taller, faster, and unnervingly silent, their bodies seemed to ripple with unnatural speed, like they were made of shadow itself. Each one carried a sleek, jagged blade that hummed with deadly energy. "Contact," Steele hissed into her comms. "Everyone, down, now." The team dropped low, diving behind crumbling stone pillars as the warforms charged forward with terrifying speed. There was no time to think, only to react. Steele's mind raced as she calculated their chances, slim at best. These creatures were designed for one purpose: to hunt down and destroy humanity's best soldiers. "Jenkins, get those charges ready," Steele barked, her eyes scanning the incoming soldiers. "We'll need a distraction if we're going to make it to the Mind Stone." Dr. Jenkins, pale and sweating, nodded and began setting up the explosives in the rubble. She was the scientist, not a soldier, but she had learned quickly. Steele trusted her with her life. The others, Lieutenant Dawson, Sergeant Kim, and Corporal McCall, were already in position, weapons raised, ready to fire. The warforms were closing in, their movements too fast for normal human reflexes. One of them lunged toward Steele, but she was faster. She fired, hitting it square in the chest, but the creature hardly slowed down. It was like shooting a shadow. It twisted, its body contorting unnaturally, then sprang again. Steele ducked, barely avoiding the slash of its blade, but she could feel the air move where it had been. The thing was toying with her. "Move! Move!" Steele yelled, rolling to the side as a second warform appeared behind her. The others opened fire. The final assault on the Yvarn was more desperate than any of them had anticipated. The warforms were like living nightmares, impossibly fast and relentless, their every movement calculated to break human resolve. Steele's heart pounded in her chest as she ran toward the Mind Stone, knowing full well she was walking the razor's edge between success and certain death. The warforms were closing in, but Steele wasn't backing down. She lifted her pulse rifle and fired, unloading a full clip into the nearest soldier. It staggered back, but only momentarily before lunging again. Steele's pulse quickened as she ducked under its slash and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its bladed strike. Her team was still in the fray, but she couldn't afford to look back. The Mind Stone was ahead. They had only one shot at this. "Jenkins, you need to move," Steele barked, her voice strained. On the comms, Jenkins's voice responded, shaky but resolute. "I'm starting the feedback loop. Get the shields down now." Steele didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the Mind Stone, eyes locked on its pulsating surface, and jammed a pulse grenade into a small crack in the stone's surface. As soon as she did, an intense psychic pressure slammed into her mind. It was like being plunged into an ocean of emotion, rage, pain, and fear, all crashing over her. But she fought back, shaking it off with every ounce of willpower she had. The grenade was primed, and it was their only chance to disrupt the Mind Stone's power. But the warforms were closing in, their screams echoing through the cavern. Steel could hear their feet pounding against the stone, like a coming storm. She had no time to hesitate. "Covering you," Dawson yelled as he unleashed a barrage of fire, keeping the warforms at bay for a few crucial moments. McCall and Kim joined in, providing a shield of bullets and grenades, slowing the creature's relentless advance. But it wouldn't last long. The warforms were fast, their reactions almost instantaneous. Steel gritted her teeth and slapped the detonator. The cavern shook. The air crackled with energy as the feedback loop triggered, sending a pulse of destructive energy into the Mind Stone. A wave of violent psychic force surged outward, distorting the air around them, sending every living thing in the cavern stumbling backward. The warforms staggered, their psychic defenses momentarily disabled. Steel didn't wait for them to recover. She slammed the last of the explosives into the exposed core of the Mind Stone. "Now," she yelled. A deafening explosion rocked the cavern, and the Mind Stone shattered in a blinding burst of light. For a split second, Steel thought the entire planet might tear itself apart. The psychic field that had enveloped them vanished, and the Uivarn warforms crumpled to the ground, their bodies twitching in spasms. The team took cover as the fallout from the explosion sent debris and energy flying. Steel felt her body slam into the ground, her ears ringing from the shockwave. She fought to stay conscious, blinking away the haze that had overtaken her vision. There was no time to rest. The mission wasn't over yet. "Steel, Steel," Dawson's voice cut through the fog in her mind. She blinked, trying to focus. "We've got to move. The whole place is coming down," Steel murmured, pulling herself to her feet. "Fall back now," Dawson shouted. The team scrambled, running toward the extraction point where the Vanguard waited. The ruins around them were crumbling, the very foundation of the planet beginning to shake under the immense force of the destruction they'd caused. Behind them, the Uivarn's warforms were still twitching, but their power had been broken. The Mind Stone was gone, and with it, their psychic dominance. As they sprinted through the crumbling ruins, Steel could see the flashes of the Vanguard's extraction pods descending from orbit. They were nearly there, but the planet's collapse was accelerating. Cracks were splitting the ground beneath their feet, and dust and smoke filled the air. "Get to the ship," Steel shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. The team made it to the landing zone, where the extraction pods were already waiting. The first one touched down, and they piled inside, barely making it before the ground erupted in a final deafening roar. The team was alive, and for the first time in what felt like years, they were going to make it out. As the pods ascended into the sky, Steel watched the planet Verus crumble beneath them, its secrets buried forever in the ruins. The mission had been a success, but humanity's war was far from over. The Uivarn had been dealt a heavy blow, but their reach was vast. The real fight was only just beginning. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Steel allowed herself to believe one thing: humanity had broken their chains, and now they would rise.